going to him for 16 years since I moved here.
Okay, we'll call the April 21st, 2015 board work session to order, and our first order of business is a testing update.
The board had several questions relative to different aspects of the state testing, and so I've asked Dr. Canlupo here today, and she's going to start with just some information in anticipation of some questions such as the opt-out and how is that with the district, the numbers. So she's going to give you some data and then open it up to any questions that you would like her to follow up on. So with that, Dr. Canlupo.
Good afternoon, members of the board. I have a few just overall numbers I think I'd like to go over with you just to tell you where we are in testing. I also have a copy of the testing calendar if you would like that so you can see where we are. I'll pass that out first. This is the entire annual calendar.
And that
Which I think we were given that last fall.
Well, it is available
Correct.
on the website as well, but this
Right.
is just for your reference right now.
And I'd like to go over just the numbers of where we are right at the moment, and then I've anticipated a few other questions that you may have about pertinent issues. So as of yesterday, and we're sort of in the third week of standardized testing, not counting part of the ELA, which was the writing, which was earlier, we had a total of 25,584 students tested. And of that, 13,670 approximately were on the computer. And the other 11,000 were paper and pencil because grades 3 and 4 took paper and pencil assessments. So we're well underway, and for the most part, in terms of, there's been technical issues, and I'll go over those, the ones that affected us. But for the most part, some of the interim technical issues that I see affecting other districts, I don't see affecting us, particularly with user error or bandwidth issues. I think that we've adequately prepared for those, and we're doing a pretty good job there. But there have been, as was covered in the media yesterday, so let me just go right to that and what we saw. Yesterday morning, a number of our schools went on to test. Over 1,600 students were on in the morning, and they couldn't log in. What the conversation with the state was, we waited until 8:30. They told us we can log in at 8:30, and so we had people waiting. And then by then, we got another update that it seems that the AIR vendor, who's the vendor for the FSA, they had an update over the weekend, something to do with the server. It was not DOE acknowledged. They had no idea that was going to happen, and so we had those children return back to class later on in the day. After 11 o'clock, we were giving the clear, and so students that, and this was mostly our middle schools, went back on. And they either were scheduled to test in the afternoon, so it just proceeded as normal, or they had started in the morning and they went back on. And they never really got into the test yesterday. We had several other issues earlier in the year. We have issues every day for a number of things, but mostly we can resolve them locally in terms of there's some conversation about should we do this or should we do that, because it can be confusing. But on the April 13th and 14th, we had a 15-20 minute delay at the schools because of sound and headphone issues. The sound wasn't working on the FSA, so we had to figure that out. Now, whenever those happen, we'll have to stop testing and then resume. And that was middle and high schools. On April 17th, the servers were down on the FSA, again, not locally, so we had an hour delay. And then yesterday, we had the 3-hour delay. There were some schools, this is intermittent, not as I'm seeing in other districts, because I have sort of an update on what's going on everywhere. But we haven't seen as many, but there are some where students are clicking on answers they can't collect. It's not highlighting what they're checking. These are intermittent issues. One student had reported a problem with a podcast. He needed to listen to a video, couldn't get to it. hard to determine those things if it's a local glitch with one isolated computer somewhere. But since we're not seeing it massively, we just deal with those as we go on. So any questions about that part?
I would just like to know what's going on a little more. I got calls in the community yesterday, but I really didn't know what problems we were having. I know at other school districts they might get a little more feedback, but I would appreciate a little feedback.
Sure.
When we're having problems, because I think it's helpful to us. At least I'd rather and say, "Oh, gee, I haven't heard a word," and then we know that we're having problems.
Do that.
But I really think it's unfortunate for our students, because there are many students that really get anxious about these tests. There are others, my grandchildren being two of them, that no big deal. If they take it, fine. If they don't, and I know myself that if I was at the age of 5th grade or 7th grade, I probably would be very filled with anxiety. But what we're doing with this show and tell, or this not being able to test for a myriad of reasons, most of which are not our fault, give me great pause with the state. And I just I wish we weren't doing as much testing. Mm-hmm. And I wish that it worked better. And I think this would have been a great beta test year.
I agree.
We're to be finished with testing the May the 8th. Is that the magic day?
Well, if you look, the high schools will continue on throughout. I mean, the FSA testing might be going away, but then we have others. They have their AP testing, their IB testing, ACE testing, and of course testing. So
but our
we'll
FSA
continue.
Testing will be done in May, first week in May.
Yes, yes.
And of this big sheet of paper, how will the new legislation, which I understand has gone into effect now immediately, like today even, with the new legislation the governor signed, are there any of these tests that will be eliminated for next year?
Well, they had already eliminated grade 11.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
The PERT has been eliminated. We have some options of how much formative kind of monitoring, which
right.
students we should be monitoring. That's a double-edged sword, because you want our teachers to be informed of where to focus their instruction. So we'll have to really, even with more flexibility, we need to be careful about just eliminating that type
Yes.
of assessment, which really has been helpful for teachers to know where to focus. So we'll have to balance that. But that predominantly, I don't know, Denise, if you can think of anything else beyond
That was
what
pretty
those-
much what was covered in the new legislation, the PERT and the FSA grade 11. There was some general guidelines about limitation the hours of testing, but frankly, we don't meet that hour requirement.
We don't have
anyway.
45 hours, more than 45 hours.
No,
but
not
my
for most
my
students.
concern is make ready and put away. That's an old work simplification tool, name that I used to call things at IBM when I would go out and study businesses. And, it's the making ready of getting these kids to the test, of changing schedules of classes, of moving people around, and then the sit and stare. The sitting in a classroom when they finish the test, as I understand, sometimes for an hour or more, some students. I know that if we were in Japan, we'd use the full hour and a half or 2 hours or 80 minutes or whatever is allotted, but American students don't seem to do that.
One
And then the getting back to a regular schedule that concerns me.
One clarification is at the high schools, the next gen, and these are not FSA tests, but their end of course exams will go all the way till the 18th. So you had said the 8th, but they'll continue further.
Yes.
In terms of the sit and stare policy, as it's now being called,
Excuse me, Denise.
yes.
I'd like to ask you about is it necessary for them to sit there and stare at the room?
Okay, so let's talk about that for a few minutes. After you have to standardize the assessment, and remember the test administrators in that room walking and monitoring everything that's going on. The decision to, and students do have paper in front of them, they can draw, they can do all that. It's bringing extra materials into the room that causes an issue. Because we have had situations, very isolated, but they still agree, where people walked off with the test material. And then remember, bringing anything into the test would have to be vetted. What exactly are they looking at when they're bringing it in? So a teacher on the fly would have to make some sort of a determination that this would have no impact on the test. So a question could be, then why don't you remove the student? The issue with that is that it causes disruption in the room, and the manpower that is going on in the height of testing is such that there's nowhere to put the student. Groups of these students walking out of tests. And the third, which I'm very sensitive to, which isn't as obvious, is the child who really wants to continue, but they are feeling anxiety because people are leaving and walking around them. So we've discussed this at great length, and really the most standardized way to administer this test without worrying about validation or invalidation of tests and without disturbing other students is to have them be there. They can draw, they can write. We just take all their materials with them, but we just can't. Bringing that extra material into the room is dangerous.
Well, that helps me with when I comment with parents. That helps. That gives me a better understanding and helps me with the conversation.
It is a difficult balance, to be honest.
Oh, and I have a question. Can they be separated prior to? Because sometimes we know in advance that they're opting out. Is that an option that they can, there's, and I know it's not large numbers, and I think you're going to discuss that too, but if we know in advance, is that an option to not have them even enter into that class? They can have So
here's, again, the issue with that. First, and I do have some numbers on that. There was 13 opt-out cases in Sarasota County. Here's my little stats on that. I had 3 at middle school, 8 at elementary school, 8 at traditional schools, 5 at charters. And what we traditionally do with those students is we have them come to the classroom. They break the seal on the test. We usually know up front. The teacher's very aware that that's happening. And then 2 things happen. Either the child stays there or the parent will remove the child and the parent takes them home till after testing. Because, again, through the height of testing, there is not a free hand to where these, to put these folks into another room, these children, where somebody else can watch them. And we don't have the option of providing alternate instructional time because every teacher is all hands on deck. So we've been having problems with those 2. But so far, out of the 13, accommodations were made beforehand. They either picked up the child and then returned the child after testing, and he just resumed with his instructional day. Again, the pulling students and saying, and it's very hard, other than the 13, we knew what was going to happen, and so we took care of that. But for a child to opt out that day is something that hasn't been heard of so far. It's usually the parent bringing the request.
But you're suggesting students that you think you're anticipating would be take less time to be grouped. It's still the same issue. To appreciate how much manpower it takes to make the accommodations, particularly to make sure every student gives the testing environment that is required by their IEP or we feel is in their best interest. We have district people that they're assigned schools. They are helping to give assessments. Everyone that's available is giving an assessment. It may be one-on-one. There are situations where you have to sit with an individual child to administer the test to give them their full accommodations. That's why there is such limitations for the flexibility that you would think would be logical. Oh, we'll just split them up and we'll have smaller groups, or they can have somebody else watch them. There is no one left. In fact, they don't have sufficient assistance, which is why district staff is assigned to schools, particularly where there's a large number of accommodations required.
Is it true that who you want the student to come in to break the seal simply because we need the numbers so that teachers can be evaluated based on the numbers?
No, that's not the case. The case is that we want the percent tested. I don't know how it will work this year, but in past years, and I'm going under the assumption of only what I know that is in current statute, in 2014 and before, for school grade, you had to have a certain percentage of students tested. That child, the attempt was made to test that child. And there's a second reason. The second reason that we don't really have the authority to say you don't have to show up on testing this day. The state statute says everyone will test. Now, if the child enters and then refuses to test, that's a different story. Then we'll follow the procedure for someone who refuses to test.
Thank you. Because these are all the questions that I've been dealing with.
Oh, and I'll be very glad to answer or write them even up if you would like.
We have a limit on how many people we have to monitor, and before we had to have a certified teacher monitoring. The new legislation says we do not.
Yes,
Does that give us any benefit, or does that help us?
It is certainly on some of the small group. It does give some benefit, but not everyone is equipped to have the responsibility associated with these tests. So yes, it does help. Does that mean that I want a secretary to administer? Probably not, because it's a tremendous responsibility and training that has to occur. No one can administer a test. Now, proctoring and monitoring, that's where the big help is. To have situations which largely we weren't able to do. We couldn't have the amount of proctoring just to make sure everything is going smoothly. It will certainly give us flexibility. I think we will still be stressed to find actual test administrators that have done the training, that are well prepared to take the responsibility there, that are significant if there is an issue. Something that a student did under their supervision that they missed. The ramifications are pretty significant for that. So we want to make sure they're trained, that we have someone that's willing to take that responsibility, but we look forward to having a little more flexibility with the qualifications in terms of just monitoring the assessment.
And proctoring, another set of eyes in the room.
I have two unrelated questions, and one has to do with the first one listed, the Flickers test, the one that was online. That's the one that they stopped.
Correct.
Well,
Part of it.
yes.
Work study, it's developed. That test is really a combination of work study, which is an observational tool. That did occur. And we'll
And
continue.
the
online
first
part.
FAIR did also for the readiness, the first part of
part.
Flickr, so which may still be a requirement. I don't think, I have seen nothing that will say that is going to change. That may be different later in terms of the full components of what is that readiness piece. What then was eliminated after the beginning administration was the FAIR assessment, which is one part of that is part of this kindergarten readiness screening.
So will the online portion for kindergartners where the teacher had to work one-on-one, is that still in place for next year, or do we not
I haven't
know?
heard anything to
not
the contrary for just Flickers. But the rest of 1-2, I'm guessing that they didn't put any more emphasis or resources into repairing that system. So no.
We don't know about Flickers,
Okay.
and we have not heard yet. But it's a question we're asking. Will FAIR continue to for next year be part of Flickers?
And we'll find out more information from that shortly at the FOIL meeting.
Okay. And another one, we received a letter from someone, and we've heard from other people too, about the students that have to sign something.
Yes.
And students sign it, and what are they signing, and can a student be held to it, and can they talk to their parents about it?
This is a copy of what is in the manual.
Well, wait until you sit back down so everyone can hear.
Does everybody have one? Okay, what I've given you is a copy of the script, what a test administrator would read to the student, and then the second page is what the student either signs digitally, acknowledges on the computer, or they sign by hand if they're doing a paper-based test. Used to be the case that all of this first paragraph where it says say, because this is part of a script, was in writing. But this year, it's in the script that the teacher reads through all this, and then the student says, I acknowledge what you have read, and they acknowledge digitally, or they acknowledge by signing a piece of paper. So really, what does it mean? It's really to preserve the integrity of the test is why they do that. And if you look through this, it says you're not supposed to talk to other students either then or after, have any electronic recording devices, allow another student to look at your test, et cetera, et cetera. They're very conscious of the fact they don't want anything on Instagram. They don't want any messages being sent about the test. But then getting back to, well, can a child go home? And if they're asked, how was their testing experience, can they say anything? And in general terms, that's not a problem. They can certainly talk to their parents with, how do you feel about the test? In very general statements. But what they're trying to prevent is any particular content of the test being shared. And I think that's the case with all standardized assessments. They're very expensive to produce. They don't want things, and especially with communication today and how easy it is to transmit information, they don't want content going across. But in terms of general conversation with parents, that was never the intention and not the intention of this.
So this is what they're given, and it says that they're not supposed to talk to other students. It seems like while we're doing the test, and they're not supposed to let
Correct.
others look at the answer book.
Correct. And
So
then
there's
they
nothing
sign.
that looks like nothing talks about parents at all in here.
And that's where I'm wondering where that, because we did receive that letter, but I've heard
I
that
think a
from others.
child probably went home and what if I'm thinking of the same case and said, "Oh, I'm not allowed to talk about that." And, a child's interpretation was, "Oh, I'm not supposed to talk about this," and that's what they said to their parent. But it was never, they could say how they felt about it in general, general descriptors. It was easy. I felt it was hard. That's not a problem.
Well, this
Content.
parent also said they couldn't get an answer from the principal, and the principal said he's not allowed to look at it. And I'm like, that doesn't make any sense.
Well, I don't even look at the test.
Not the test.
Yeah.
This.
Oh, no. I mean, they're able to see this this is the script. This is handed out. We train people with the script.
And this script, I would imagine, is on the DOE website also? Or?
If the administrative manual is posted, and I believe it is, yes.
Okay, so it's in the administrative manual
That's
on the
what this
DOE
is from.
website.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
Can we take the time when we're reading this to say this does not mean you cannot talk to your mother or your parents, or can we just put another sentence in there?
You can't.
You can't really modify
We're
the
not
script.
in a standardized, in any standardized, whether it's state testing or norm reference. The standardization includes the directions, and that's part of the training. You can only say what's in the script. Now, they could choose to modify that and have it standardized to include that. But we, as a test administrator, must follow verbatim, unless they allow some flexibility within the script itself.
Mm-hmm.
We must follow verbatim what is ever in the script. And this is from DOE in terms of that's how they keep it standardized.
So if we want to change it, then we have to have DOE change it.
Correct.
We can't change it.
Correct.
And there have been times in the past, I will tell you, that we have noticed errors in the script. This can't possibly be. It doesn't follow workflow. And we've called up and they have changed the script. So it's not that I couldn't ask. But when it's not in here, we really can't.
I guess my thing is nothing here stands out as unusual from any kind of standardized test, but I don't know if it's the overall testing environment and the stress from the students to the teachers. How's the perception that they can't go home and talk to their family about it? I mean, we took standardized tests in school too. I never remember having that feeling of blocking out a conversation with family or parents. So I'm just wondering how that got into the play. And we did receive one, but I've heard that a couple of times. So I'm just curious if it is just the stress of the environment and that the
Probably.
severity
It's the first time that came to my attention that somebody was saying that or even heard about it. I've heard usually the same type of scenarios year after year. This is the first year I've heard that, and I would say it was anxiety. I mean, that somebody and I don't know how old the child was, but maybe they misinterpreted what was said or, didn't feel like having a conversation about it at that time. But
That could be.
I don't know.
I'll save a couple other questions until you're done with your presentation.
Okay, and I pretty much am. I think I've covered the refusal to test and the procedures for that. I've covered where we are. In our technology and what's going on there, and also and security issues. So please, any other, I'll try to answer.
Another complaint that, and I thought this was a very good letter, it had some good ideas, but there are a few things, and one of them being that there's no educational benefit from these assessments, and complaining that they're being used, for data and dollars and evaluating teachers, and that there's better ways of doing that. Well, we agree with some of that, but the remark that there's no educational benefit, could you address that?
Well, I won't talk about the FSA because the results
we don't know
are still
about
not
that
out.
one.
But talking about the FCAT, we used the results of the FCAT a number of years to on a bigger level. I'm not in a classroom, obviously, but we've used that to target trends. What were some deficits, some strengths, some challenges, to look at the subcomponents and to look at you have sub-scores within there. I mean, I think by studying the FCAT, we realized that students weren't performing well. At least I analyzed that several times on informational text years ago. We saw those discrepancies. So I wouldn't say it didn't have educational value. Now teachers are able to get into it and look at trends. I mean, even if you just go so broad as saying when a child comes into my classroom, I can see their history of how they've done on these tests over years and see if they've made growth. Now, to direct daily instruction, we need further formative type assessments that are blended into the learning environment so they don't even look like assessments. But I would not say that there's no educational value. But of course, the day-to-day work, you would need finer assessments.
Well, I know even for us as school board members, when we were setting our goals and we wanted to, increase the scores, and we also wanted to reduce the disparity from the achievement gap. And I think we've made some targeted efforts in some areas that I think have seen promise. So
I agree.
I know that we use the FCAT. We just don't know what the FSA is at this time.
Also, the benefit of the FCAT, and there will have to be some sort of a linking mechanism to the FSA, is that you benefited from 10 years of history. We're able to chart the progress of those subgroups within across schools, and then dividing by elementary, middle, high, then between schools. We were able to monitor progress with the same standardized instrument. And that's important because even though it's not maybe driving daily instruction, we're able to make more global decisions. So it does have,
I think it has some
educational
benefit
merit
when you're looking at the student. But then when you're looking at the teacher, especially when you look at teachers that aren't in the instructions and basing whether or not a teacher can be retained or not, or gets a raise, I think that gets to be a little more questionable because they weren't really designed for that, were they?
Correct. Well, it's one data element, I would say. The model that they used for reading and mathematics teachers was pretty robust. It was a regression model, and it does do a prediction on how each child will score, or supposed to score. So statistically, I think for reading and math teachers, it was pretty robust. When you start, but it is only, again, one measure of many, many measures that would lead into the value added by a teacher.
Well, speaking of the value added, there's been another, when somebody scores a perfect score, and I'm sure we have students that do that, under the value added model, they added something onto that perfect score. And so the next year, even if the student got a perfect score, because in order for the teacher to have made progress, the student had to have made better than a perfect score, and the teacher was being punished for that. Right. And I would imagine that might have happened for some of ours, or did we address those issues already?
Well, in the prediction model, they even, if you look at a range of scores, let's say a test can go from 1 to 100. When you're doing this regression type model, it will predict past 100, even though the scale itself is only going to 100, because it's trying to permit, this child is predicted to go beyond that. How psychometrically sound those predictions are past the scale is something that, we can debate. But it is allowing for that growth. The other thing that we didn't do in our model is we didn't say whether you met prediction or didn't meet prediction, right? We looked at that. But we looked at the growth beyond.
When you're talking you're talking about Sarasota County?
I'm talking about the state's model, and then when we adopted that to our local models.
Okay.
There were some counties that said, this teacher, it will be measured by the number of her children that exceeded the prediction set by the state. Now, whether they did or they didn't. And we didn't do that. We looked at the range beyond and the range below the prediction that the state set. Does that make sense, sort of?
It's a complex process and formula that even with our local assessments, we're trying to duplicate within that capacity because it does help to level the playing field. It is not a perfect formula trying to take the art of teaching and quantify that where you have different content areas, different types of students. It's the best science provides at this point, And that becomes even more questionable when you have limited amount of data, where you don't have trend data and you have a real feel for this. So certainly it eased my mind when this new legislation put the percentage from 50% to 33%, so that it doesn't have quite the impact, where it acknowledges, okay, student performance is a piece of the teacher evaluation. It shouldn't be at the 50%. And I think we'll continue to work and be as fair as possible. But anytime you're trying to measure a teacher's value with the way students are performing, we know you have to level the playing field. It can't be what that student brings to the table that makes the difference. It's what does the teacher bring to the process, and what difference does that cause? And that's difficult to ascertain between all the variables. We're doing the best statistical model possible for that's available, and it's complex and it's hard to understand, and it takes a tremendous amount of work from the research and evaluation, of which I would put our Office of Research and Evaluation across the district. I would say we have one of the best hardworking people that are using programming that don't go the easy route. It would be so much easier for even locally for us to do the quick proficiency. It's percent correct, and that's how we'll judge teachers. But we're not willing to do that because that's not being fair. But that means the burden is on that office, which also works hand in hand with those test coordinators. You know, we've talked about what's happening, but I will tell you, talk about stress. It's with those individuals in each of our schools handling all the individual situations. We had a power outage at Southside this morning, just seamless. Okay, we're not going to be able to test today. We'll move on. We have to reschedule kids. So they're keeping people calm and focused in sometimes very stressful environments. So you have a lot to be proud of, not only with the people in the school, but the people that are leading them at the district level that have done an incredible job and continue to help us navigate through these anxiety-producing, complex problems in a way that really is being fair to our teachers and our students, as fair as possible.
Okay.
Well, I think, the whole emphasis in information technology, this being the information age now, is on analytics. Mm-hmm. If you listen to the chairman of the board of IBM, which I have a history with, you'll notice that she says everything that they will do in the future will have to do with analytics and the ability to analyze things to death. What my concern is on the part of the family and the student. We're testing, and we have taken a molehill and turned it into a mountain of anxiety and concern for these families. We are doing this test now. When will they get the answers back? I was told that once we went to a computer, we could just turn around the numbers, very quickly, but in essence, that isn't going to happen, correct?
No. Typically, and I'll say what the typical process is for a test rollout, you would have a year where you would field test, and you would gather data and you would set cut points, etc. Yes. But that's not happening here. We knew that from the beginning, right, that we'd be using this, and then we would have to wait until the late summer where they would set cut points and we would actually know what a score meant. We were supposed to, by state statute, June 8th is the week of June 8th, get the results back, and we were told initially it would be in percentiles and in T-scores, which would be hard enough to communicate, and then wait later for the actual scores and levels. Now, as a result of the latest legislation, we know that they're going to wait until probably late summer, early September, where they have an independent validation company come in and validate the results of the FSA. So I'm expecting them even later than
so we
what
won't
we
give
initially...
Parents, we won't give parents any information in the summer at all. I mean, like last year, we had information 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 in the middle of the summer.
Depends on some grade level that's not the FSA, like the next generation test, some of the end of course assessments. Of course, they will come back. Grade 3 results will be, I was told, I don't have this in writing, but grade 3 and grade 10 results, because of the promotional and graduation decisions based on those tests, will come back, but we will have to do our own, it's called equipercentile ranking, where we would look at the percentage, the lowest, under the 20th percentile students who scored on the grade 3 assessment, and then look at those as level 1 students, basically. So we will have some scores back earlier, but the great majority will depend on the results of that independent commission later in the summer.
Caroline?
I'd like to go back to the VAMs, the value added. I saw a video of a teacher who was talking about his students had, say, 100, but a very high percentage.
I know the video.
Did you saw the video?
I did.
That's absurd.
Yeah.
How? And then you put the value added in there, and he actually lost money on his salary because of it.
This was, I think it was somebody in Volusia or Orlando area, right?
Yeah.
What he was speaking of was what I was probably not explaining as clearly earlier, and that is that a regression model can do predictions past the scale. Now, I don't know how that model is working over there, but I can tell you in the cases we saw students being predicted to achieve beyond what was possible, we double-checked some of those scores to see, because we also saw it here, and then either excluded the student or determined that it had no weight bearing on the analysis. So it's a reminder for us to consistently check for that.
So if the student scores are perfect, you don't use that score because there's no weight on it?
No, we don't let it harm the teacher.
No,
We won't use it
With the
against
VAMs?
the teacher. No,
Okay.
no.
All right. Thank you.
But it is a strange concept. I agree with you. It is. In fact, when we saw it, I thought it was a strange concept, but since then we have dug in a little bit and seen that in order for a model to work, it's odd, but it has to go beyond the given scale because of those instances of a ceiling effect.
You mentioned promotion, and talk to me a little bit about going back to the students that have been opted out. What happens there in 3rd and 10th grade if they don't take those tests?
Well, for if they, and some of the, first of all, I have my stats here about how many students actually were in 3rd grade, and it's very few.
Okay.
I only have
3 in 8 in
3. There's 3 in, well, no, there's others in elementary school, but there's only, I see 1. Yeah, I have 3 in 3rd grade. That's where it would be. But you're right, your numbers are correct. I had 3 at middle school, 10 at elementary school for a total of 13. And 3 of the 10 at elementary school were grade 3. And so for those students, in few of the cases, because I've actually talked to the parents, they're willing to let them take the Stanford. And if they have score above the 45th percentile on the Stanford, then they've met the requirement and they can go on. Those that have not, I think I'm going to defer to you, Lori.
Well, the option is a portfolio that has been initiated that basically doesn't look as much like an assessment. It's more like classroom activities that you have to verify. It is certainly burdensome sometimes for the teacher to make sure that, because you have to have multiple, for every benchmark you have to have multiple demonstrations, and the state just has approved the next portfolio type of assessment. But again, that can be done over time in the classroom. But by law, before we can promote, we must have some validation that the student is achieving at least of what is comparable to a level 2 or higher. So, or unless there's good cause, and there's exemptions depending on if a student has been previously retained 2 times, or a student with disability and has been retained once, or so there's some good cause exemptions that we are allowed, and we process through those and verify them, and so it's a long process and something that's been going on for quite some time. But certainly with the timeline has some additional challenges this year. But I believe unless those students that opted out have deficiencies, there shouldn't be any problem verifying that they are at the proficient level, given the options that are available through the state. But we will have to have one of those options.
I love the portfolio assessment. I wish that we could do that, especially kindergarten through 3rd or 4th grade. I wish that we could concentrate, because it's so much better for the kids, so much better to actually seeing what they're doing and see the improvement that they've made. I understand we can't because of staff.
Well, but promotion decisions for K through 2, the only place that you have this type of control from the state is 3rd grade. The 10th grade diploma issue, because you have more additional time, I'm not If they've opted out at that, there's more opportunities where they can make a decision. So that is not as concerning as the third grade. So it is really a third grade issue. We have it for new students coming in that perhaps missed the testing. We must validate. We have to give them, we always have, this. Typically we give them the Stanford, they pass. It's not an issue. But we have to provide that additional check because in the state of Florida, they have a focus on third grade and their statute. So the concept of what goes into a promotion decision largely is looking at classroom performance, not a single assessment at every other grade level. So I think those have always been. It's the exception is third grade where there is state statute that precludes us from using that full flexibility, but certainly the portfolio is available as an option. This year, in past years, we would know the group to focus on. Portfolios might have been started earlier in the year because they are they're worried about them. Those are students that are not opting out. They're taking the FSA. So a teacher might have said, I'm going to start this because I'm worried about this child. But we're having to, even with the SAT 10 administration that we are going to implement at the end of the year, working under the constraints of not knowing how they performed on the FSA. So we're looking at risk criteria so that we know that whenever we get that data, that we'll be prepared to offer summer school to help those students. And they've given the opportunity to demonstrate, even since they got the test, perhaps it was a bad day, perhaps there's some learning that's occurred, they were so close that there are always a few that at the end of the year when we give the SAT 10, they pass it. They meet that. Not large numbers, but a few, and everyone counts, then we're sure they're good to go for promotion. So we'll be working through that. But I will tell you at every other grade level, performance on this summative exam is one small piece of our promotion decision. I would say a very small piece of it. We look at daily performance and many other metrics in making that very critical decision.
The Sarasota Film Festival on Saturday night and Sunday had a film, Most Likely to Succeed, that looked at the educational system, and it said how, the disturbing fact was so many students graduating from college and there's no job for them anymore. And that, we're educating today for students whose job is not even invented yet, and how fast the world is moving and how we have to change this old system of educating. And I know we've incorporated a lot of these things, where you have the kids all lined up in rows and the teacher at the front. I know even in the kindergarten that there's some teachers, they don't have desks anymore. They just work amongst the students. And our middle schools, I think, are an excellent model of that. But what was disturbing to me was that they said when they looked at these students who took these tests at the end of the year, and then if they gave these same students, they aced the test at the end of the year, and then they came back at the beginning of the next year and failed the test, same student, and that we're teaching them to memorize facts and memorize them for a short period. And they were saying rather than this paper and pencil thing, that they need to be getting their arms around something and learning something, need to learn to communicate, that critical thinking and problem-solving skills. But I thought the most disturbing is when they interviewed these high school kids, and they told them this. They told them that the way we're teaching now, and they were trying to talk them into going to this other model. And the students were concerned about going to the other model without the textbooks and the tests. And the one girl said, "No, teach me to pass the test, because when I get to college, I'll learn those other things, and I have to get to college." And so many of those kids down the row agreed with her. Teach me to pass the test, not to learn the facts, or to learn the things I need to do. I'll learn that later. Right now, teach me to pass the test. And that's what concerns me about these standardized tests, is that we're teaching our children that is the most important thing, is to pass this test. And oftentimes some of the teachers have that same mindset. If this is how they're going to be paid, the most important thing for them to do this year is to get the kids to pass the test. Not to learn, not to gain knowledge, not to the love of learning, but to pass that test. And that was surprising. And you want to look at it, it's the most likely to succeed. And it was MLTS, a film. You could probably Google it and look it up.
Anything else? I guess my frustration is we keep talking about state tests and state regulations and state laws and opt-out laws from the state, and yet we're the one that seems to get all the complaints directed towards us. I guess my wish would be they'd send their complaints where they belong. But anyway, thank you very much, Denise. Next, we have a budget update from Al.
Good afternoon, board members. I'll try to be as exciting as the last meeting you just had, or presentation, I should say. I did have some oral surgery last week, so forgive me as my voice may go in and out or whatever. I thought before I started into looking at the comparison of the legislative proposals, I'd just basically bring you up to date as to our budget process. School and department budgets returned back into my department on April 15th, tax day. And anyway, they're right now going through and preparing the surplus and vacancy lists. And that'll be given to the HR department hopefully this coming Monday. And then I'll be able to, for your next work session in May, bring you the actual results of the staffing, and I'll bring back the actual department budgets with their organizational charts, which is basically status quo. There's a few changes, not much. And the actual school budgets. The one area in the school budgets that I'll mention that as far as procedurally changed somewhat is basically on Title I funds. Instead of the Title I schools being given a total number of teaching units, they were given a dollar amount and were given the flexibility to look at their school improvement plan and decide how they wanted to spend that money, in compliance with their school improvement plan. So that is, and I know most of the Title I principals have received that very well because they like that flexibility much better for their own local community. So just thought I'd update you on where we are on the current internal staffing process. And the other thing is I'll make my little plug right now. As we all know, the House and Senate are at odds with each other, and we really don't know exactly what our budget's going to be, but because we do have the voted millage, that operating millage really is allowing us to have the stability to go forward, even though we don't know exactly what the final results of the the legislative budget will be, because we all know, the health care issue is what's looming out there. And if the federal money does come out of the total budget, state budget, then there'll have to be some slicing of the pie a little differently, so which could impact the legislative proposals that we currently have right now. So with that said, the governor, his budget on a per student basis for dollars per student was the most, $7,176 per student, or 3.78% increase. The House per student is $7,129.74, or a 3.11% increase. And the Senate, $7,122.83 for a 3% increase, 3.01% increase. The Senate, however, gives us a lot more flexibility in that they have less in the categorical area, and they put more money in the base student allocation. So that gives us more flexibility in the way in which we would spend the money if the Senate is the one that they go with. Of course, in my history here, there's always a compromise, so I know it won't be the Senate proposal, I know it won't be the House proposal, but there will be something in between. So, and we'll just have to wait and see what that is. I think you all know that in negotiations we negotiated that depending on what that base student allocation comes in at, and we negotiated that if it exceeds $4,164 per student as far as the base student allocation, that a 1.25% cost of living would be put on the salary schedules for next year. So under the Senate, if they were to go closer to the Senate, then it means 1.25% would be put on the schedules. If they go closer to the House, it means the 1.25% would not go on the salary schedules. The other thing is when I prepared the salary budget, basically this year we had a 2.5% performance supplement, as we called it. That's non-recurring. So in my preparation of the salary budget for next year, basically that 2.5% has been subtracted, and under the Senate, the way I did the budget, I just put then a 1.25% back on for the Senate, but the House has a 2.5% reduction in the budget as far as salary is concerned. And on the first page there, I did lay out my assumptions in preparing the appropriations budget. I just went over the salaries, the group health or the benefit side of the budget. The group health has a January 1, 10% increase. Of course, we don't know what that'll be. I'm just using that as a placeholder right now. Hopefully that's going to be a worst-case scenario. Also, we are budgeting for approximately right now about 52 additional staff in the general fund. However, I'll tell you that will change because as the schools turn in their budgets, they have the flexibility, especially in basically it's the high schools. If they have money they earn through advanced placement or money they earn through the IB program or the ACE program, they can take those dollars and actually buy additional staff. So I imagine when I come back in May with the final numbers, I would think the total number of staff will be a little bit above 52, but right now I don't know exactly what that number would be. Within charter schools, right now we have an estimated increase of about 485 students there. So that'll increase the payments that go to charter schools. Of course, the other thing that impacts charter schools is what the final base student allocation is and what each legislative proposal is. So that's when you look at the detail here, that's why you see the charter school number different under each proposal, because each proposal has a different dollar amount for base student allocation and the categoricals that the charter schools participate in. As far as purchase services, I just put a 2% increase in cost of services there. Energy services, I actually have that going down a little bit because I'm estimating that the oil price will not go above the $100 per barrel. And now materials and supplies, if you did look at this in any detail, you'll notice that the material and supply area increases. The reason for that is on our instructional material money, I'm right now budgeting that we will spend the whole amount plus our carry forward. And that is because we have some initiatives. The math adoption, K through 12, will be roughly about $3.9 million, and that'll be more than what we actually get in the total allocation. And then we're looking at some other programs that the instructional material budget will cover. So your material and supply area goes up. Capital outlay and other expenses, I just have that going up a 2% increase. Going on to page 2, I've outlined there the tax roll that the governor used, and the House and Senate are using the same tax roll amount. And then I have what our current tax roll is. And basically, right now, everybody's projecting that tax roll is going to go up about 6%. Now, whether that 6% is close or not, we really won't know until we'll get a feeling on June 1. Because on June 1st, the property appraiser will give us a preliminary estimate of our tax roll. And at that time, then I'll be revising the numbers on the discretionary millage and the number on our voted millage and, of course, our capital outlay dollar amount. So, we're still in that, as we call it, cone of uncertainty as to what the final numbers will be. So I can still be having all these disclaimers and say that, as Frank always loves to kid me about, is, where did it land on the dartboard this time? But anyway, we're still in that cone of uncertainty right now. The millage rate looks like it's going to stay pretty much the same. Under the Senate, it goes up just a 0.032, and that's the most of all the proposals. But that's a very, very minor millage change. So I imagine when everything's said and done, our millage rate will stay pretty much the same, if not even maybe decrease from our current 7.777. And that, by the way, this is the most easiest millage rate I've ever had to remember because of being all sevens. So, because most times I forget them by the time I'm here at this stage. But anyway, as our tax roll goes up, as you know, the state has to fund at least 10% from state dollars. So they'll have to reduce our millage rate so our required local effort doesn't bring in more than the 90% of revenues. So my own particular opinion is right now, or guess would be that our millage will be less than it is this year based on our tax roll, because I really do believe our tax roll, when we get our preliminary estimate, will be above the 6% when the property appraiser gives our estimate. Going on to page 3, I then break out, basically do as a summarized area where I have your projected actual for this year, 2014-15, and that projected actual is based on our operations through March 30th, 2015. And then I've got a column for the governor's proposal, House proposal, and Senate proposal. And you can see that as far as bottom line in total revenues and transfers in, the governor is the one that would have had the most for us. House down a little bit, and then the Senate a little bit higher. Now, of course, I just said the House was more than the Senate. Well, let me back up there. On the K-12 education budget, that's correct. However, we do receive money through workforce development for adult programs. The House has less money in the workforce development area. So when I put all that together, that's why the House, as a bottom line, has a little bit less than the Senate as far as your total revenues. Because, again, the House has less money being put into the workforce development budget, which funds basically our adult programs at our Suncoast Technical College.
Al, when you say the governor's budget has more than the House and Senate, does the governor's budget have the same amount of student increase as the House and the Senate, or student increase?
He has about a 17,000 student increase. The House and Senate have about a 25,000 increase. But what I did was I took the governor's budget and factored for a student increase in the way I did this.
Oh, okay.
The other thing, though, is, as far as, I'm glad you mentioned that, this current year, our student increase is right around 26,000 students statewide. So with them coming in at 25,000, depending on how the economy grows and people move into Florida and so forth, even at a 25,000 student increase, we could find ourselves under, because we do know,
because that's low.
We do know Florida's growing. So anyway, right now, also with that said, And I did pick up on the technology issue about everything should be so much faster. Well, this week I finally received what they call recalibrated results of the February FTE count, and everything's getting slower and faster. So, with that said, we don't have what we call the fourth calculation of the Florida Education Finance Program yet, and that is calculated based on the fourth calculation, or the February February FTE count. And again, that was just given to us this past week. And I would actually, just today, I finished going through it, and I did have to send off to one school that they definitely had not counted or didn't include all their students correctly, and I know our IT department's working on that right now to get that corrected. So unfortunately, we continue to get further behind and further behind, because at this point in time, I've always had the February FTE count. And of course, I think, now I got off on the soapbox on technology. We're also, of course, having to push summer school back this year because we don't know exactly what students will need summer school. So, anyway, yes, we're progressing. So now I'm beyond that. Okay, then going on the bottom of page 3 there, I have broken out the appropriations by the various appropriation areas: salaries, employee benefits. I really already went through, talking about salaries and the 2.5% that comes off and the 1.25, and you can see how those numbers change between the House, Senate, and Governor. And then same with the employee benefits. Page 4, you get into, and probably the line I guess I'll highlight is purchase services, charter schools. You can see under each proposal how it differs. And for example, this year I project they'll receive, and this is a flow through, by the way. It's we get it and just flow it through to them. But this year it'll be about $47.3 million. But because I estimate they're going to grow by about 485 students, you can see that it goes up to $53 million to $52.5 million based on each different proposal. And I did highlight the materials and supplies area. You can see right now this year I'm projecting we'll spend about $10.6 million. Next year it'll be 12.8, 12.9, close to the $13 million area in materials and supplies. And of course, I will emphasize that when I do the budget, I am trying to do a worst case scenario. So I'm trying to budget for the worst case and everything. So just wanted to emphasize that.
That always makes us feel so much better when you come in at a better number than we.
Yeah, I enjoy that, and although I can't say that in my whole career has that always happened, but because there are those times when the legislature will call a special session mid-year when they don't have enough money, and then we'll have to do a mid-year holdback, and in those times that's not a fun time, but anyway. Then our gross fund balance, unassigned fund balance at the bottom of page 4, projected for this current year, 2014-15, projecting that our unassigned fund balance will be $34.9 million, or about 8.69%. I think that's going to be a pretty close number because I have projected in there receiving 1% over collections, so I don't think we're going to be too much further apart on what I'm projecting for June 30th of 2015. Now, under the others, the Governor's House and Senate, those unassigned fund balance numbers, they would be what we're projecting to come in at June 30th, 2016. And under the Governor, it would be $34 million, 8.11%. House, $34.8, 8.38%. And then the Senate, 32.3 million, 7.72. So one thing I will mention, in earlier workshops, I was thinking that we might go below our target of the 7.5%. When I originally, as I got into more detail, I found that the formula I was using to back out the 2.5% was not taking the full amount out. So my prior budgets, if you were to go back to see what I presented to you in January and even February, the salary budget was higher there because I was not taking out the full amount of what was a non-recurring performance supplement. So these, and that's normal, as you get further and further into the weeds and do more analysis, and you look at the figures more and more. And again, I have different eyes look at it. My staff, I have them looking at things in more detail than I have had before, because I am looking at a future life, and someone else is going to have to start doing this down the line. So you need to start training people. But anyway, that came to light on that. So
Al, before you move on from that, because it brings up something I wanted to say anyway, and I've brought this up in years past, some of the problems, and I just kind of want to know what the rest of the board thinks about it, because some of the problem I have with it, because we've been going over this stuff for months now, and we'll sit here and do this, and then I'll go home and get out what you gave us last month and the month before and the month before. It would be very helpful to me because you've got the projected actual for our current year, and then you've got the three different proposals. What I would find helpful if there was some way to know kind of where we started in this particular process with different things, so that we can kind of see as we go through the budget process, are things getting better, are things getting worse, are things staying pretty much like you projected them. If there was some way to just have a original projection or whatever when you start at this particular budget cycle, that way I think it would be easier for me at least to track, like I said, are things as we go through the budget cycle and the state goes through with their projections, are things looking a little better or looking worse, and without, like I said, having to go back and go to March's handout or February's handout or January's handout or something like that.
And that's a very good point, and I have done that in the past, in prior years. This year, the only reason, because I had so many different proposals to give, but when I come forward with the May update, I'll keep these as the base and then show you whatever the changes are so you can track and see. This year, though, I really do feel strongly we probably will go into special session, and I don't think it'll be till June that we really do know what our final, numbers
we don't need
are going
to know
be.
till like July, right?
June 30th.
Well, actually,
Unless he has a crystal ball, which may be a good way of doing it.
I mean, no hurry or anything.
Well, actually, I'm glad you brought up the July date. July 1st, the property appraiser normally certifies the tax roll. Department of Education then has until basically July 17th to compute our required local effort. So, and then our superintendent's tentative budget is actually this year going to be July 21st. So I will hopefully by July 17th we'll have what our required local effort is, and then be able to put in our correct, revenue numbers. So when we present the superintendent's budget on July 21st, and then that following week, I believe it's July 28th, we'll have our first public hearing whereby we give out what our millage rates will be, and then I send them off to the property appraiser's office, and then they use those to compute the tax notices that go out to the taxpayers as to what our board is looking at levying, and of course all the other taxing authorities. So we're getting into that area. But yes, I will make sure I put on the next one the differences between the two. And of course, it would be not much. It'd be very. I'm hoping it's all more. So, but we'll see. So anyway, I don't want to see any bracket numbers. So the final thing I thought I just meant. Well, on page 5, I have your unassigned fund balance. over the years. And of course, the high point was in 2002, 2003. The reason that was the high point was that was the first year of the voted millage, and we did not spend, the whole amount. We just spent a small portion of it, really. And really, what we used it then was we were going to raise class size by, I think it was 4 back then, and we used most of the money to not raise class sizes and to keep programs intact because. So anyway, but then you can see how the unassigned has went up and down, and now we're down towards we're still within our board policy, but it's down towards the lower portion. And then I did under other budget information. Of course, we have no idea where this is going, but the House Bill 7037 on the charter schools. The only thing I thought I'd mention there is. And again, we don't even know if this will come to fruition or not. But it could have an impact on the way we distribute our millage money to the charter schools. Don't know if that'll happen or not. But I just thought it was worth putting some verbiage in there. But I don't think I'm going to really go through it all because things are in such a state of flux within the two houses there that are two separate chambers that I don't know where this will end up because I don't really see a companion on the Senate side that has the same type of things in there, but just wanted to bring it to your knowledge that there could be some kind of change.
One thing they're also talking about is allowing students to come from outside of the district, and we do have some of that now under special, like let's say if a teacher's child can come to the school here in Sarasota, or special circumstances where the parent is working, and I know the charter schools take them, but they're counted in our FTE count. They're somehow talking about having the FTE follow the child. They're talking about like if they were coming from Manatee, that Manatee County would give us a check for those students, or they're just counted in our FTE?
It would be counted in our FTE. So if somebody from Manatee did come, just as they do right now,
right,
they're in our FTE count.
Okay, thank you.
And that's the way I understand.
So Bay Haven, for example, which does have some Manatee students, and our charter schools, and now we're looking at Inglewood having a charter school, that would all be our FTE.
Correct.
It's my understanding that we have agreements with both Charlotte County and Manatee for the transfer of students back and forth. So all this that's being proposed in the legislation, we're already doing. We have choice schools, we have magnet schools, everything that they're proposing, we are doing. And
we're giving charter schools more money than is recommended or is perhaps in this bill. I know some school districts now are looking at the fact that charter schools are coming to the table and saying, hey, we don't want to pay the 2% or the 5% to the school district to manage administrative and oversight for us. We think that's too much money. They're even looking at what school board employees make and being concerned about their salaries. We don't have that issue here because our charter schools, again, are getting a bigger share than they are anywhere else. But these are strange times.
Yes, I will say amen to that.
And I asked our lobbyist on Friday, I said, so tell me what's happening. I guess Senator Lee had thought that there may be some issues with having a budget by June 30th, and that perhaps they'd have to hold some things in reserve or just go as a status quo forward. But I guess we don't really know what the House and the governor plan to do because they're not engaged. And I guess over the weekend, as normal, for this time in session, they would have stayed in town all weekend and come up with their conference members and so forth. They did not do that. So it's going to be interesting to see what transpires this week. I've been kind of glued in watching and watching Capitol updates and doing some other things to see what happens.
Yeah, definitely this year will be one for the record because I believe it was back in the 90s when we're at impasse on an issue that it wasn't until middle of June we actually finally had a budget compromise. I feel that this time this year will probably be the same thing. But again, I am going to emphasize that by having that voted operating millage, that's giving us the flexibility to move forward, whereby if we didn't have that, I believe we'd be like some other school districts that I'm hearing about that are holding off doing staffing and are not really moving forward with their budget process, because with us moving forward like we are, we will be in the late May time frame actually out there ready to hire our teaching staff, and we know we're going to have plenty of positions because of retirements and of vacancies and so forth. So that will give us the advantage of hopefully hiring a quality staff, and we all know quality staff is what really is needed for a quality school system. So.
And we're going out now and going to other states and doing some recruiting and trying to get ahead of it because there is a shortage of teachers.
And I wasn't going to go through all the rest of the detail unless somebody had some questions. So with that, I'll, if there are any other questions, I'll entertain them. If not, I'll...
Anything else? All right. Thank you, Al.
Okay.
And this portion of the workshop is adjourned.
You're welcome.